And then I had him pasted to the board, and I took a picture of it and put it on Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that, with no identifying information, of course, to protect their privacy. But
Yeah.
Ever since then, and we didn't get a whole ton of feedback, but the kids were a little bit more engaged, and I've been fascinated with this social media thing. And, I've been following you on Twitter, and, I've been following the LDS Conf hashtag, the Twitter stake, everything like that. And then I see the rise of, obviously you've seen the rise of Lindsey Sterling and the piano guys, and it's all been kind of through, not with the help of the mainstream media or recording companies or whatever, but James the Mormon, all coming up through YouTube, away from the mainstream and building this niche market. Is really cool. It's really cool to see. Sorry, that was kind of a long answer, but
no,
I'm very interested in stuff that you're doing and people like you are doing. So there you go.
Well, I've already pressed the broadcast button. So what I'll do is I'll roll it in. I always just do a rolling start so that anyone who clicks the link to wants to join, they just kind of catch up as we go.
Sure.
And then this will be available. I take the audio and I make a podcast version of it so that it's available for consumption. But for any of those who are chopping at the bit, the video will be available for anyone that kind of watch and catch up. So I'll start us off. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Third Hour of Power. This is Grady of This Mormon Life, and this week I am joined by Dustin Hurst. Dustin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're too much. You're too much. It's I'm just glad you're here with me. Dustin, tell me a little bit about what you do and where our audience might know you from.
Well, I'm kind of a nobody, which is kind of how I like it. But I live an interesting life. I think the most important thing is that I'm a member of the church who's interested in forwarding the gospel and sharing the gospel and uplifting others. But second only to my membership in the church and my belief in the gospel is me being I'm a father, a husband. I have 2 kids that I love dearly. And then way below that in the priority chain, I'm a communications director for a nonprofit think tank, but also an aspiring author who's working on a couple books, one to do with addiction in the LDS Church, and then the other one is the cross section, or the intersection of social media and the LDS Church, and kind of some people who are doing it well, and so that I can teach others and kind of share with others the best practices. And that's kind of how I came to know you. I'd been a follower of yours for a while, but then I could put out this call for people who are doing this stuff right, and you responded. And I'm, like I said, I'm honored to be here, and I love what you do.
Awesome. Well, and I'm really passionate about helping and empowering people to be able to share their faith online. That's one of the things that I'm workshopping right now, is being able to have some sort of, I don't know if it's going to be a webinar or live, but something where people can get together who want to be better about sharing their faith online. They watch the Elder Bednar talk, and they realize that it's time to hasten the work online. But there's also other ways that we can hasten the work of the Lord. And this week we're talking about chapter 14 from the Howard W. Hunter Manual, which is called Hastening Family History and Temple Work, which really goes hand in hand. Last week's lesson was also, all about the temple. And I think it's neat that we understand that the temple is where we want to be. A temple is a place where we make and keep covenants. But just like, those who go to the tree of life and partake of the fruit, they're there with Lehi, is that, Lehi, he takes that fruit, and what's the first thing he wants is to share it. The same thing is, once we go through the temple for ourselves, we have the opportunity to go through the temple for other people who didn't have that opportunity and have since passed on. Dustin, what kind of things kind of stood out to you from the lesson?
I think kind of touching on the idea of serving others, and what you just mentioned is the first time that we go through the temple, obviously we go for ourselves through the endowment, and of course I can't share too many details about that, but we go for ourselves. Past that, we go for other people. And I think just because of some stuff that's been going on in my life with my family around me and extended family and stuff, I think it's very cool that this is an interesting form of service we're always, of course, asked to serve others and to love others and to uplift others on, on this earth, and sometimes I think we do that out of love, of course, but sometimes I think we like the praise that comes with being, and this might seem a little far out there, but we like the praise that comes with being the person who helps, the one who gets the thanks or gets the plate of brownies after you have served somebody. But this is interesting because there's no thanks until after this earth, and there's no, you think about it, there's no immediate reward, yet this work is so important and you do it so quietly. And I think it's a great model for how we should live the rest of our lives. When we do service, we should not preach about it. We should not boast about how cool we are because we serve. We should do it quietly and not for fanfare, but out of love. And that's one of the things that's not necessarily directly in there, but kind of one thing that was impressed upon my mind as I read through it.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, it totally does. I was just thinking as you're talking about that is that, when you do an ordinance, like you bless a baby or you ordain a child to the priesthood or you perform a baptism, there's a record that's kept. And on the record, we have the name of who the ordinance was performed on, or I guess, I don't know what you would do if you're the person that's getting the ordinance, if you're getting the ordinance done to you. The ordainee.
That sounds almost criminal.
The ordainee, I'll call them,
there you go.
and the ordainer are both recorded, and even witnesses. Are witnesses recorded? I think witnesses are recorded too. But in the temple, none of that is recorded. The only thing that's recorded is the fact that the ordinance was done for an individual. We don't write down who performed the ordinance. We don't write down who was there as proxy. We don't write down who the witnesses were. It's just meant to be something that you go and you give to that person with no other record being kept. Of course, a record is kept in your heart, and as you do those things, the people who receive, I'm sure, will remember you. But as far as fanfare or worldly recognition, there's none of that.
Well, I think it's important you talked about, and for some reason the word individual stood out to me there. This is not something that there's no such thing as a mass baptism or a mass ordinance in the church, and it's just reminds me faster. It really would be. I mean, just if the prophet could come out and say, anybody who's ever lived on the earth is now baptized, and that would be fantastic in the sense that we wouldn't have so much work to do. But then it would betray the purpose, I think, of the temple in that reminding us that God has always been willing, and Christ has always been willing to go after, leave the 99 and go to the one. And it is an individual ordinance that we need to remember that, again, we're doing this for one person. We're taking time out of our day to serve one person that we'll maybe never, ever, ever meet ever. And it's a really special experience if you go in with the right mindset and if you consider the magnificent nature of what you're doing.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point there of just that these are people that we have never met. A lot of times, sometimes we go there. We've got typically a handful of names that we might do in our lifetime of people that we actually knew in this life. But oftentimes, the people we do this work for are people that we've never met. But there are a lot of blessings that come from doing family history and doing our own names. There's such a great wealth of tools out there now that we can go to the temple with the name of an individual, but also we can take time to research and get to know who they are. Baptisms is sometimes harder because you typically do a large group at a time. But when you go for, the endowment, that's only one name you typically go for in that session. You can have the time to research who they are. And a lot of these things are online. And one of the things I just sort of blog post about was just using family search to get more out of the experience of preparing names to go to the temple so that when you go, you can remember that person or get to know them and feel like you know them and remember who they are. And then you go and you are able to feel a lot closer to them because they appreciate the time that you've taken to care about them, not just to care enough to go to the temple, but to care enough to know who they were and care enough about their salvation that you want to search them out and you want to get their work done for them.
Yeah, and one thing that I do occasionally, and I haven't been as good with family history as I should. Um, I can give the usual excuse that I'm busy and stuff like that. But
We've all got
what
them.
I what I well, yeah, and what really is just hasn't been a priority as much. I mean, I've dabbled in it and used the apps and stuff like that. And it's really cool that the apps are there. But one thing that I do when I go to the temple and I get a name handed to me is I look at the time period, I look at the name, I try to imagine the challenges that they went through in their time period and kind of as best I can. I could never imagine what it'd be like to live in the early 1900s or the, whatever time period. But I think it just helps me understand what salvation. This might sound weird, but a little bit of what salvation they might have needed, and what difficulties and challenges that Christ helped them with. They may not have been baptized, but they're probably still Christian people who sought out Jesus Christ and sought His grace and His comfort. And it's always been kind of helpful to me just to say that, hey, this person may not have been baptized, but they were seeking out Christ, or they probably did. And kind of imagine that and put myself in their shoes, if only for a few minutes, because we only get the names, during the endowment for about 2 hours, and you want to be focused on other things through that process. But if it, for the very least, a couple minutes or 10, 15 minutes, try to think about that person and consider, their life.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point of being there in the temple, and especially in the endowment, but for all of our ordinances, is also paying attention to the ordinance that's being performed. One of the things I've kind of alluded the temple to be like when you're going through again for other people is it's almost like the sacrament where we get to renew our baptismal covenant every week. We get to have dedicated time to remember the covenant that we made at baptism and renew that in our hearts and recommit. And I think the same thing happens in the temples. We go for baptisms for the dead and for the confirmations, because those are the same as the covenants we make at baptism and confirmation. But as we go for doing initiatories or endowment or for sealings of husband and wife and of families, is that's in a way our time to kind of recommit, to remember the covenants that we made in the temple time ago, and recommit ourselves to keep doing those things and to remember what those things are.
I think you touch on an excellent point there. We've all heard stories, whether it's in conference talks or in our individual wards, of people who were having trouble in their marriages or their family life, and they went to the temple. And there's nothing magical necessarily about the temple, but just that process of remembering the commitments that you made, and taking yourself back to those promises is incredibly special. I know that, there have been times when my wife and I would go to the temple, and maybe it had been a long, stressful week. The kids were just crazy, or there were bills unexpectedly, or, work was difficult, and we hadn't connected, or we were, mildly cross with each other, but, we were okay to go in the temple. We'd go do sealings, and just to be sitting there with your spouse, considering the time that you've spent together, and looking each other in the eye and recommitting, and being just there in that moment with your spouses, it's incredibly important. And that's one of the big benefits, of course, for us going to the temple, is that we do remember those things, and we can recommit and re-examine why we in fact made those promises at that time.
Yeah, me and my wife have started this tradition where on our anniversary in the morning, we like to go to the temple together and do a sealing session. And it's great to be able to sit and kneel over the altar. And every time we go to sealings, we always do a kiss over the altar when the officiator isn't looking after the first ordinance is done.
You
But
sneaky man.
oh yeah, well, she always gives me grief because when we first kissed when we got married, I was a little maybe mild. Milder than she would have liked for me to be. And so she was always like, why was I having to lean into you? And I'm like, I don't know. It was a temple, and I just, my family was all watching. And so now we try to sneak a kiss over the altar, and it's great for us. I always joke, I say that we, every year we renew our vows.
Right.
in the temple. But part of that is that when we go with family names there, especially maybe even people that we did know that were married, is that we think about the love that we have for each other. How much
Right.
my wife love each other, and how heartbroken we would be if we were ever separated for eternity. And then think about now this couple that we have the blessing of coming to the temple and sealing together, and that they faced that reality. They faced the reality of that they were no longer together as husband and wife until the moment when me and my wife got to stand in their stead and make that blessing possible for them. And I just think, if me and my wife can have that blessing for us, we should do everything we can to help have that blessing for other people, because I can't think of a happy existence without my wife by my side, without my children near me. And so, just like the sons of Mosiah, where they trembled that any soul would be lost or perish and dwindle in unbelief, and that we should have the same thing as we think about these people. As if there was someone that we knew and loved and thought, they will miss out on exaltation, or at least they're waiting to be able to receive that until we step in and find who they are, understand them, and bring them with us to the temple so that we can do their work for them.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about the temple, and this is so true with so many experiences in life, but of course the temple is more important because of the covenants and the ordinances we do there or perform there. But when I was a teenager, we would go do temple trips on the regular. Living in Utah, I'd go to the Manti Temple or the Provo Temple or whatever, and the temple was nice, of course, but I never really valued it the way that perhaps that I should have. And that was just because I was a young, dumb teenager. And,
Mhm.
I was a fat football player guy, and I just wanted to, do the temple thing, enjoy that, and then go out to the all-you-can-eat buffet afterward. But now that I'm a dad and, I'm married to a wonderful woman who graces me with her presence, quite frankly, every day. I wonder as kind of the flawed man that I am, why she's still with me. But then I think about the two wonderful spirits that we've brought into this world. And I don't like to take myself there because it's not a fun place, but like imagining life without them, it just hurts because I love them so much. And now I understand, like you said, why we go do these sealings, because family love is the greatest love. And bringing those families together forever is more important than I think we even understand as saints, and definitely more important than I think our general culture understands. That's a love that is so powerful, and only in the temple is it its strongest. I think maybe the temple in our homes at times, but the temple, of course, is very powerful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. All right. Well, I think, and that's a good capstone for this lesson. It's just how important the temple is in binding families together. Not only the families that you go and bring to the temple, but as you go and serve, you'll bind your own family closer together. Like Brigham Young says in the lesson, is that we need them for our salvation as much as they need us.
Right.
Dustin, is there anywhere else that someone might go to follow you around on the internet or learn more about what you've been up to?
The best place would be probably Twitter. My hashtag or my handle on Twitter is just Dustin, DUSTIN Hurst, HURST, one word, Dustin Hurst. I write at idahoreporter.com, but that's not necessarily spiritual in nature, and it's Idaho political news. So
As
the
long as you're
best would be
conservative,
just
it'll be okay.
well, I'm so here. I'm personally, like, politically, it's weird because I'm libertarian politically, but conservative personally. I respect people's right to choose, but I choose a very conservative lifestyle. So I hope that qualifies me.
Oh yeah, we're all moving to libertarianism now.
Ah,
After Donald Trump gets the nomination, we're all jumping ship and being libertarians. So
it's interesting that you say that. I have a lot of, of course, I run around with people in political circles, and many of them are not. In fact, most of them are not Mormon, and they continually bring up the fact that the 50 most anti-Trump counties in the entire United States are all predominantly Mormon. So I get the token Mormon slap on the back for being anti-Trump. I drive a terrible Buick LeSabre that's parked outside, and I have a nice Never Trump sticker on the back of my car. But we'll leave that for another conversation.
Well, for those of you who are listening along with us, if you are a supporter of Trump, or if you're not, make sure you also share this episode with other people that want to get more out of the temple, and try to find more ways to get engaged with family history work, particularly our most recent article. You can find a link to it in the show notes for this episode. But it's over on our website at this-mormon-life, where I share 5 ways for you to get more out of family search. A lot of things have to do with some of the new features that are there. I share some pretty cool family pictures, and also just ways that we can love our deceased ancestors more and make the temple experience all the more sweeter. Also, make sure you stop by our benefactors, This Week in Mormons. They're the ones that are kind of the overseers, the inspiration for this podcast, especially their other podcast, Sunday School Bonanza. They're like the sister to us, where they talk about Sunday school lessons in the same format here. And if you like this lesson, if you thought that this episode was helpful for you, I would love if you just go on Twitter, just at This Mormon Life, and just give me some feedback. Tell me, hey, that was great. Hey, it wasn't great. Hey, I like ice cream, and tell me which flavor is your favorite. And then I will respond to you and tell you that wrong, it's vanilla. But until next time, we thank you guys for joining us, and we wish you all a fond adieu.